My name's Meredith. I work here at Living Web Farms. We are an education and research nonprofit organization, and we're all about educating about sustainable agriculture, sustainable living, and just in general resilience. So we do classes throughout the year on all aspects of sustainable living, including cooking, alternative energy. Actually, Richard is our alternative energy guru here. And it's okay to ask questions as we go along. I'm not really sure what all everybody needs the most of tonight, so we're going to do an overview and hopefully have time to practice. And if you want to use the stones, Patrick's going to bring another stone. If you want to use the stones to practice sharpening your knives, hopefully we'll have time to do that as well. So I thought I would start by talking about why this class is so important. This is a class I've been wanting to offer for a long time, and I've noticed people are so amazed at when they see others, especially here at the farm, chopping with ease and prepping food extremely quickly. So I've had like teachers at the school or participants in class saying, oh, I just don't understand how you don't cut yourself or what's going on. And I could never do that. And it's actually all technique, and you can absolutely do it. You can be lightning fast, really in a matter of no time. We all probably chop pretty often, so once you learn the technique, you're gonna be practicing it constantly, and you can get better pretty quickly. So basically, we're all about whole foods, diverse foods, and my feeling is if people know how to work with the foods in whole form and break them down really quickly and uniformly, then it's gonna encourage them to eat better in general. So I think that good knife skills really are just one part of a holistic thing that is eating better. And then obviously the speed, the flow of prep, you're not going to wear and tear your equipment as much if you're using it properly. So we'll talk a little bit about that, how the knives are built, what type of knives you have, and I won't know everything, in terms of brands, what things are a ripoff, what things aren't really working. In general, if we're chopping things correctly, then it makes us better cooks because if things are cut right, they cook right. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So we'll start by looking at the knife, and you're welcome to grab yours. Hopefully everybody has something like this. This is called a chef's knife, and this is like your main go-to. This will be what you use most of the time, and in my opinion, it's a good idea to invest in a decent chef's knife. At least this is a 10-inch chef knife, so this is a really good size. A lot of people get a 7 or 8-inch, but the bigger you get, then the more you can do. Sometimes people have both, a smaller and a larger. We'll also talk about things that you don't want to do with this knife. But the basic way that a knife is built, this is not a particularly nice chef knife, just so you know. This is a pretty crappy one, but it's often used in restaurants. It's available for, I think this knife was like maybe $20 or something at Kitchen & Company, and it's fine. I mean, it's fine it's not particularly comfortable, but it works for what it, for high volume. And so most knives are built either by the steel being stamped and then the stamped knife being inserted into a handle like this. So this is a stamped knife, but then you also have knives that are full tang knives. This is an example of a full tang knife. You can see the entire shape of it, right? And full tang knives are generally considered to be nicer. They're generally heavier. And they'll have better, better handles, sometimes not ergonomically better, but just nicer materials. And it's really neither here nor there, but stamped knives will be cheaper. So like I'm a butcher and I use boning knives a lot and I go through them pretty quickly and I don't like to spend a whole lot of money on them. So I buy stamped knives for that purpose. So the way to talk about it is this is called the spine, the back of the knife. The bottom part is called the heel. This is the bolster, the handle, the edge, right, of the blade. Some knives have a little spot for your finger right here that's called the choil. Some don't. That's kind of an old school thing. And then if you have a knife like this, then that metal in the middle is called the tang. And that's just helpful to know those terms for when you're talking about the knife, like grip up higher on the heel or something like that. And so that's just a quick primer on the anatomy of the knife. And so in general, how you want to hold it, there's a few ways to hold it, but in general, you see people doing it like this. But you want to pinch up on the heel and the bolster with your thumb and your forefinger. It's going to give you way more wrist stability and a lot more control. So don't hold it way back here on the handle. So that'll be one thing we practice tonight is just a different grip. There's a thumb grip where you put your thumb on the back of the knife, and that's generally used when you're like boning meats and you want to push through them. You're not often going to use that for vegetables, but it is a type. This, you'll see an awful lot, but it can give you bone spurs. It's really not good for you. So if you want a better stability, you need to be pinching it right here or doing your thumb grip like this. And then there are other holds for meat cutting, like the good old psycho grip where you're pulling through, stuff. But in general, that nice pinch grip is going to be your go-to. And then, so you don't want a lot of like movement in your wrist. You want to be like using your arm more. And if you can't, like if you're doing something that's tough to do, you want to put your body into it, your shoulder into it. It's going to be better ergonomically for you. And then you need a paring knife of some kind. This is also not a very good paring knife. It's just one that I found here in the drawer. But for example, and we'll have a chance to practice this later if you want to, you don't ever want to use a chef knife to peel things. It's just too bulky. So that's what your paring knife is for, just more like geometrical work. The other thing you should have is a boning knife. So this is for working with fish or meat, poultry. This one is semi-flexible. So you can see, I recommend getting a semi-flexible boning knife, about 6 inches in length. You can get a stiffer one, which I have here. This is a nice knife. This is a Messermeister. It's a full tang knife. It's stiff. You can see the difference. And that's more for like trim work, And a serrated knife, which I don't have a bread knife, but you should have a good serrated bread knife at home. Does everyone know what serrated means? Okay, great. Because I don't have an example. And then you need a steel, a honing steel. Does everybody have one of these? You should use it every time you use your knife. So that's the next topic is taking care of your knives. So this is a stainless steel honing steel. They also they can be made from diamond, they can be made from porcelain. I recommend just getting a stainless steel one. You should get a long one. Don't bother with those little short ones because if you got a 10-inch knife, you're just wasting your money. You need to be able to move the whole blade across the steel. And so the way this works is, and if you have a nicer boning or chef's knife, you might want to look at the manufacturer and see how your blade is angled, because the way you hone and the way you sharpen relates to how, if you look at the very edge of your knife, you can see there's a bevel. Yeah. So look at it kind of like tilt it, maybe 45 in the light, and you can see that angle at the end, and that's the sharp part. So what happens is, even though this knife isn't serrated, it's made of a bunch of tiny little teeth that are all lined up. And when you chop, every time you chop, you kind of kink those little teeth out of whack. And so what honing is doing is it's bending those teeth back into alignment. Sharpening is actually shaving metal off and creating a new edge. So that's why we don't want to sharpen our knives every time we use them. We just want to hone them and bend them back into shape. If you're a typical cook, you're cooking, twice, 3 times a day, you probably only need to sharpen your knives if you have a decent knife twice a year, once or twice a year. You can get somebody to do it for you, or we're going to talk about a way that you can do it at home. But you want to be honing every single time. And so in general, most knives are beveled at a 20-degree angle. So take this as your 90. This is your 45. So your 20 is going to be somewhere right there. And the best way to learn to hone starting out is you can put it on a towel, or you can just put it on the table, and you just, you can sit there and find your angle, and then you just run that sucker on both sides at that angle. But the trick is really getting that angle right. I was reading about some knives today because I wanted to be able to hopefully address some people's questions about their brand. But I heard somebody say they had a Wusthof. Does anyone have a Wusthof knife? Yeah, so some of those are beveled at 14 degrees or something. So so it may be a little bit, and they'll be sharper then, right? The sharper the angle, the sharper the knife. So you will have to, obviously you're not going to find it exactly, but you want to go a little bit more acute than a 20-degree. Yeah.
I have I don't know how to say it, Suntoko knife. Is that similar to a chef knife?
Yep, you can
use it the same way.
You can hone it the same way, sharpen it the same way. One of the things about the Santoku knives that I want to point out is the point of those knives is, who has mine? Somebody. Okay, just hold it up. You can see those hollow edges right there. Those were put on there to try and encourage airflow as the knife moves through the food and then keep the food from sticking to the knife. But one of the things that's really interesting is that they don't actually work when they're made like that, because the hollow edge has to go all the way to the edge of the blade in order for the air to actually keep moving through. So you might find yourself chopping and it's still sticking to it. And it doesn't mean it's not a good knife. I mean, just treat it like a regular chef knife, but you don't actually have like an original santoku that's made the way it's supposed to be made. And I don't know why they've started doing that. It doesn't make any sense. The whole point was and there's a name for that hollow edge. It's like some guy's name or whatever. It's supposed to go all the way to the edge, but for some reason it doesn't. So it's just like a chef knife, but it's a little bit different. Let's see. So I would recommend, I mean, if you really want to have a knife that you can keep and that you're going to have for a long time and you plan on taking care of, I think it's worth it spending $100 or so on a chef's knife. Maybe even more if that's in your budget. When it goes down to, like I said, it depends on how much you're using, like the boning knives, the paring knives. You can easily, getting a good full tang, nice, pretty heavy paring knife, you can spend $20 easily. A boning knife, $15 to $30. This Messermeister was $100 for a 6-inch stiff boning knife. A serrated knife, a bread knife, you can spend $30 to $40 on a good one, nice full tang. And then your steel is going to be about $25. So you can just sort of build that collection as you go. So brands, I mean, I'll just throw out a few that are trusted. So Wusthof is a really good brand. That's a German knife. Sabatier is a French knife. I had a Sabatier chef's knife for years and years and lost it in a divorce, and I still cry about it. But it's a really good knife. Messermeister is a decent brand. Then there's a couple Japanese companies that make Western-style knives, so if you've ever heard that difference. Korin is one, and Tojiro is another that I really like for Japanese knives. The difference between a Japanese knife and a Western knife is that Japanese knives are beveled only on one side, just because of the way they cut their vegetables. They cut them at an angle for the most part, and it doesn't mean it's better or worse, it's just different. A lot of the Japanese makers also make Western style, so they'll make knives that are beveled on both sides. And you really kind of want to go with that until you get really into sharpening, because the one side bevel can be a lot harder to sharpen. So if you can just, get it beveled the same way on both sides, then you'll have ease in honing and ease in sharpening. Yeah.
What about materials? I mean, is everything made of stainless now? Because some of my older knives are all carbon steel, and they're really nice to sharpen.
Yeah.
And they stay sharp.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, it can be really good, but they also they wear a little bit.
Yeah,
the blade
they have
will wear.
to be maintained.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of different materials used, a lot of different metals actually. And it depends. So you'll get into this a lot when you're shopping, if you're trying to put money into it, like what's the Rockwell hardness of the steel? And so what that is a scale where they drop a big weight or a diamond or something on the metal, and they measure the dent that it makes, and then that tells them how hard the steel is. And there's a bunch of different ways that Rockwell scale works, but all knives are on the HCR part of the scale. And generally good chef knives range in like a 58 to 60, maybe like 55 to 60 on the Rockwell scale. But really, I don't think the Rockwell scale is that big of a deal. I mean, as long as you're in that range, I think that you're getting a good knife. So the harder it is in general, the harder the steel, then the longer it keeps an edge, but the more fragile and thin the blade is. So if you drop it, it can chip easily, or it can bend, or it can bow if you're sharpening it, like if you're putting uneven pressure on it when you're sharpening, which is a common mistake. If you have a softer knife, it's not going to keep its edge as long, but it's going to be, you can beat it up a little bit more, shall we say. So I just know, of those brands I just mentioned, Tojiro makes, I think it's like a tungsten core, and then it has a stainless exterior, and they make knives at 60 on the Rockwell scale, so they're harder knives, they're more delicate. And then, like this is probably going to be a much softer, I don't even know what this is on the Rockwell scale. But in general, when you're buying, you'll look at that Rockwell number, but you'll also look at mostly the ergonomics of it. Does it feel comfortable in your hand? This one puts a big old fat callus on my finger every time I'm doing a lot of volume, and I think to myself, it's time to get a different one, but I just haven't. So that's a problem. And then how's the weight of it feel? You know, you don't want, there's a really crappy one here I can pass around so you can see what I mean. You don't want to have to force your knife through your food. If you're forcing your knife through your food, it means it's either not sharp enough or it's not heavy enough. So I'll pass this knife around as an example of one that is not heavy enough. And you can just feel it. So just like, you know, I usually just kind of put it in my hand and just feel how it feels to me, you know. I mean, in general, you guys look like you have pretty good knives here. So you look like you have some pretty hefty knives. Obviously, you don't want it to be too heavy for you, but I don't think anyone will have that issue with a chef's knife. But like maybe cleavers and stuff, you don't want it to be so heavy you can't deal with it. So in terms of, buy trusted brands. I mean, there are some like Chicago Cutlery that are a little bit like, I don't know. So, you know, look online. I think there's a blog called The Sharpest Knife, and they have a list of trusted companies and companies that are maybe not so trusted, and that can be a good list to go off of, in my experience. In addition to honing when you're thinking about how to take care of your knives, you want to keep them clean. You want to keep them dry. You don't ever want to leave water on your knives. You can see this paring knife that I found here has a bunch of rust spots on it. That's because water's been left on it and it's been put away. You know, I'd love to get a knife magnet at my house as a perfect example, but the only place I have to put it is above my stove. And I'm not going to put it there because all that water vapor when I'm steaming and cooking things is just going to go up onto the knives. So now I keep them in a drawer.
In the dishwasher, is that being silly?
I think that's great. I wouldn't put my nicer knives in the dishwasher either because things get banged around in there sometimes, you know. Some people do put them in the dishwasher. Maybe they're getting just as much of a life out of them as, you know, as you would be, but I think that's a good practice in general. And the main thing, you know, is just to make sure that they stay dry, you know, and that they have like sort of a dedicated spot where they're not getting clanked around with everything else. Come on in. Sorry if you've missed a bunch. Okay. So let's go. We kind of talked about buying a little bit. Does anybody have any questions so far just about what we've talked about? Did I blow through it too fast? No. Okay. So what we'll do now is talk about cutting, which is what everybody's probably the most excited about. So we're going to go through a few different techniques. And look at me, I don't even have the vegetables that you have. Hold on really fast. Let's talk about your holding hand. I want an onion. This is by far the most magical thing you'll ever learn about using a knife, and it will increase your speed 20-fold, is if your holding hand is in the right position. So when you're chopping, you want and when I'm talking about your holding hand, I'm talking about the hand that's holding the food. So you want to hold it like it's in a sling. It needs to be like this to your body. And then you want your fingers, and here, you always want to create an edge that's flat against the board, because if something's rolling around, you're more likely to cut yourself. And don't pay attention to how I'm cutting this onion right now, because it may not be what I'm going to show you later. But I'm just trying to show you the holding technique. Or we could do garlic. That would be even more exciting. So I'm going to just cut this in half to make a flat surface. And then I'm going to keep my hand kind of parallel to my body, like it's in a sling. And I'm going to hold my fingers. So this is my garlic. I'm going to hold my fingers like this, not like this, so that when I'm chopping, I can chop my fingertips off. I want my fingers to make a little wall so that the knife can rest against my fingers and brush down the fronts of my knuckles and make that cut. And I'm using my fingers will inch back, and that will be what determines the thickness of the piece of food. So as I go, see how fast that went? And I didn't chop my fingers off. And it takes some practice. But that's something that you'll practice tonight, is just getting your holding hand in the right position. And then we'll look at different cutting techniques. So there's like, in general, you're going to be pushing your knife forward and down. That's the way to do it. There is such a thing as a back slice, where you can bring it back like this for making really thin, like if you're chopping herbs or something, you're gonna make really thin pieces, you can back slice through it. And when we learn chiffonade, you can practice that because that's a really great place to use the back slice. But it can be a little bit tougher. So we'll start, but just in general, you're going forward and down. And so in general, there's about 4 different main motions. The slice, right? We all know that. Then there's the chop, okay? The back slice, which we will practice later. I'm just sliding it, rocking off of the edge of the tip and backwards. And then the rock chop. And this is what you'll use for mincing, which we'll talk about later, where I just take that thing and I rock it. So let's talk about, now that we have those little motions down, we can look at the different techniques. So we'll talk about chiffonade. So Pat picked these greens. You can thank him for going out in the cold and doing this. And you all may know that when plants are growing in low light and cold conditions, they store a lot of nitrates in their stems. So in the wintertime, don't eat your green stems. Put them in your compost. So what we'll do first, and you can do this with me if you feel comfortable, is I just fold, when I have a green and I want to take the stem off, I just fold it in half and I take my knife and I cut it off. That way, if I want to chiffonade, I keep my leaf in really good shape. Yes, there are. Does anybody need a cutting board? There's one, a brown one right there that you can use. You guys might have to take turns with the cutting boards. I don't know how many more we have. The little mats are all out, I think. So chiffonade just means to cut your food into long, thin ribbons. It's best used for leaves. So what I'm going to do is I've taken the stems out of my little kale leaves, and I'm going to stack them on top of each other. I can put other little bits inside, and then I'm going to roll them up pretty tight, or not so tight, whatever you feel like doing. Just stack them up on top of each other and roll them up. And you can roll them up loosely or you can roll them up tightly. Just make it so it's easy for you to manage. Right? Just like that. And then you just start at the end and make sure your holding hand is like a sling, like it's in a sling, and your fingers are making a little wall so you're not going to cut yourself. And then you're going to take your knife and you're either going to slice forward, you can back slice, and just scoot your fingers back as you go to dictate the size of the chiffonade. And then when you're finished, you can see how I'm just picking them up and just sort of fluffing them out. That separates all the little ribbons of food, and I'm ready to saute or put it in a salad. Very well done. That's great for like little basil leaves or, yeah, just make sure you're gripping it not back here where it's going to wiggle, but right here on the heel and the bolster. All right, feel free to chiffonade to your heart's content as we go, but we're going to move on. How you doing, Pat? We're going to go to julienne. Julienne just means to cut your food into matchsticks. You have carrots on your table. Many of them are very small, so you'll be able to challenge yourself in that way. I don't have extra. I have. Some of you have 2 carrots. You have extra? Does anybody else need carrot? Or does everyone have a carrot now? Yeah, he needs one. Richard can do it. I know he can. So what I'm going to do is just cut this carrot in half. so it's more manageable. Now I'm going to cut the stem end off of it, put it in my stock pile. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut off one side of it to create a flat edge. And then I'm going to go around and I'm just going to cut the sides off to make it as square as I can. Those can go in the stock pot. So you're just basically trying to make a square. If you feel more comfortable cutting the piece in half so that you have a flat edge and then cutting sides off of it to make it more square, that's absolutely fine. And then you can just create long, thin chips, basically. And then with each chip, you cut your sticks. Forward and down. You're just basically slicing. And there you have your julienne. And this takes some practice. It's hard to do quickly. That looks great. How's everybody doing? Good job over there. Yeah, with julienne, especially on a carrot that's a harder vegetable, you may have to sort of grip it, however you can. Go slow. Don't need to be a whiz here. It's looking good. We can use these turnips to practice more julienne later if you want to. And we're going to practice peeling for whoever wants to or has a paring knife with them. Yeah, it looks great. So I'm going to move that aside, and we're going to move on to chopping. And let's see, what do you have? You have garlic, which we'll use for mincing. You have, okay.
Just chop the carrots?
You could. Chopping refers to cutting your food into pieces, and it doesn't matter if they're the same size. So you can choose to just chop up your carrot now, or I think we can probably use half of our onion for chopping and half of our onion for dicing. So what you should do at this point is go ahead and, let me grab another onion just so I'm working with the same thing you guys are working with. Thank you. So with an onion, there's kind of a specific way to look at it. There's two ends. There's the root end and there's the stem end. So you want to keep the root end intact because it's going to keep all the different parts of the bulb from falling apart. So just cut off the stem end, put it in your stock pile. And then take the onion and cut it in half, cut through the root end, through the middle of it, but keep it intact on each side. Now you should have two halves of your onion with the root end attached to them. And then you can go ahead and peel off that outer layer. I also put onion skins. I save all my onion skins for stock. In the culinary world, the lesson is to clarify, clarify, clarify. I always have the clearest stocks ever, but that's not really that important at home. So if you put onions in your stock, it creates a very flavorful broth, and it's really pretty. Especially red onion skins, it becomes like a deep brown color that is really nice.
They're the hardest to peel.
Are they? I just take that whole outer layer. If it's giving you trouble, just take that outer layer right off. Don't try to just get the skin. You'll drive yourself insane.
Okay.
Skin is very high in quercetin. I don't know if it's water soluble, but if it is, you're getting lots of really good antioxidants. You spend a lot of money in the stores for it.
Hey, look at that.
Red onions have the most.
Right on. You can also, and I mean, I'm going to do this just for demonstration purposes. You can I like sometimes to take off the root end. I mean, that just like the proper way, I guess, is to leave that root end on. But I take it off, and then I'll show you two different sort of ways to do it. With the root end on, you're basically just going to make a little checkerboard with your knife. You want to go in and you want to cut with the grain of the onion, even spaces, and then you'll come perpendicular to the root and you'll slice off bigger pieces. Yep. You can also cut through, you can put your hand on the top and you can fillet through the onion if you want to have, smaller pieces as well. The other way I do it is if I've taken the root end off, I take and I hold, and this is a little bit renegade, but it's faster for me and I like it. I go ahead and put my knife down and then I go over top of the knife with my hand and I push the onion together. And this allows me a lot of control and I can just slice. And then I will go and I will push it down so that it's kind of like dominoes and it's flat, so it's not going to slip around. And then I go and I make my chop or my dice. So that's another way you can do it. And it may be easier than trying to keep the root intact and do your little checkerboard. It doesn't matter. I'm over here crying. Do you have an onion? I'm convinced that the more onions make you cry, the more dehydrated you are. I don't know why. I just feel like that's true.
Well, tears would help to flush the stuff away.
I guess so. So I just feel like I've noticed when I'm more hydrated and I've had more water throughout the day, then onions bother me less.
You don't think it has to do with the kind of onion?
I think it definitely has to do with the kind of onion. Also, I keep my onions in the fridge, which helps. What? Yeah, wear glasses. How's everybody doing with that? And we'll have more time to practice. We'll have turnips to practice on. So once you've basically chopped them like that, then you'll go the other direction.
Do you stack them up first?
I would try to keep them flat against the table. You can stack them up if you want, but if you've got still that half intact. Yeah, at this point, I think that's the right approach. Yep, totally. And then the other thing I wanted to show you with the onion was dicing. So the difference between dicing and chopping is that you're making the food smaller, but it doesn't have to be the same size. Dicing is cutting your food into small pieces that are of the same size. And so that's really just about control in creating your chops, right? So you can have, obviously, the smaller you want it, then the thinner you make those slices, and then alternately you change the direction and you make them thin again, so you get a smaller dice. So I've taken the root end off of mine again, so I'm going with my hand over top. It's probably a good idea also to fillet through the onion if you want to do a really fine dice. So who has a half that's intact? Anybody?
Any more onions?
Yeah, I'll just use this. Thank you. So when I say fillet through it, I just mean, and this can be a little bit sketchy when you're learning, but whew.
The other trick for onions is
A fan. Yeah.
blow stuff away.
So that would be just putting your hand on top of the onion and putting your knife in the middle of it and then just slicing back through it and then pulling it out. I've left the root intact, and then I go in and I chop, and then I'm going to tip these down and go through and make my next cuts. So you can see I got a bit of a smaller result there. And anybody can come up here and look at these if you want to. These are basically the same. The second half is for your dice. So if you've already done your chop, your dice is just a smaller basically a smaller chop, and you want to try to get all the pieces of uniform size. So fillet through the half of onion. Put your hand on top of it. And just go about halfway through, there you go. Keep going. You want to try to keep your knife level. Right now you're angled down towards the board. There you go. And it may be helpful for y'all to stand up when you're practicing so you can get above the food. Now you do the checkerboard, basically.
But you're not gonna cut through this, we're gonna cut it here.
Should have practiced with apples. I'm like losing it up here.
If you put your face in the freezer.
I mean, yeah, or just go stand by the sink and run the water. It helps.
Yeah, if you put your face in the freezer, it does something to the gas and makes the gas.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Good tip.
Because I'm really sensitive to it. It usually makes me like Tammy.
Just
Faye, or,
totally
like,
cry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Red onions are specifically like harsh.
You
I
can
think.
stick like a piece of bread in your mouth too, and it blocks the vapors from coming to
Interesting. You're like a little encyclopedia of onion crying.
Or goggles. I had to
Goggles.
wear goggles.
Definitely.
Now you go that way.
All right, is everybody done with their chopping their dice? Feeling good about it? All right, so now we're going to learn how to mince with our garlic. Mincing just refers to cutting your food into very small pieces. So I've separated these from the entire corm for you, but you still got paper on the outside of the garlic. And the easiest way to deal with that is just to take the bigger, flatter part of your knife and just bang on it. And then you can peel the paper right off. You can go ahead and do that to both of the pieces I gave you. Who has a paring knife with them? Okay, good. Quite a few of us. So there's a couple different ways to mince this. You can use a paring knife, but it's not as fast as using a chef knife. But if you're using a paring knife, you can go ahead and cut that clove in half to make flat sides. That might be wise. And then if I'm using this paring knife, I'm just basically making that checkerboard once again. Even cuts through the clove. And then I'm turning and I'm back slicing here with the paring knife, but you can forward and down.
You cut the thing one way, and then you turn it, and you chop it this way. So cut it this way. First, did you get the skin?
And I hardly ever use a paring knife because I find it tedious and slow. But that's one way that you can do it. Good for peppers, right on. So I would go ahead and I would just come in, and this is where you really practice your chop and your holding hand being right, is you can just come in and you can make little chips. And then you come in with your rock chop and you just mince it on up. And I found that faster and easier than the paring knife. Thick as you want. I love chopping celery and garlic and trying to get the chips as thin as I possibly can, just by using that sling technique and holding my fingers like a little wall. You'd be amazed how thin you can get it. Thinner than a food processor.
You know, I heard that, well, I always use vinegar, like a splash of vinegar on the cutting board, and it never does anything
Wait, it never does what?
for onions.
Oh, really?
You know, like,
You put vinegar on your cutting board and it doesn't make you cry. Here's another tip. You'll have to try that at home. He puts vinegar on the cutting board and then the onions don't make you cry.
Yeah, but that's not good for your wood board.
Maybe not.
I don't think so.
Huh.
But it'd be fine for this.
Yeah, that's a really good thing to talk about is different types of cutting boards. So the best thing for your knife is going to be end grain maple. So the difference between that is like, say this is a stick of wood. So an end grain board is made with a bunch of sticks of wood put up next to each other, and then the top of the cutting board's here, where all the ends are pointing up. And that's easier on your knife, whereas other cutting boards are made with side grain, so the side of the wood is all stacked up next to each other. And that's, okay, but it's just not, like the highest quality blocks are maple end grain. Poly boards are, really handy for lots of volume, for meat and juicy stuff, but they are harder on knives and they wear faster. And those little mats are probably the worst thing you could possibly have.
But you'll show us how to sharpen our knife.
There's just so much.
Discussion about
No,
bacteria being left.
you will learn that.
Have you,
Yeah, definitely. Well, wood is, it holds on to scents, it holds on to bacteria a little bit more, so you've got to keep it clean, scrub it down. Like when I'm using my end grain board, which is my best one, as soon as I'm done chopping something, I at least give it a rinse, and then I put it back, and then I want to oil it every once in a while. So I have like a beeswax product that I put on it. I got it at Lowe's, you can get it there, but it's like, I don't remember the brand. We can put it online or something for you guys if find it, but it's like a bee-based product. So it's all natural and it's food grade, and you just wipe it on the boards when they start to look dry. And also, if you have really nice wood handles on your knives, it's good to put that stuff on the handles too to keep them moist and hydrated.
even regular mineral oil from the drugstore, that's food grade. That's
Food grade mineral.
food grade mineral oil from the drugstore would be like,
You buy it in a grocery
yeah.
store too.
Right.
right, and that would be, that's not as good as the beeswax, but
No.
it's available.
It works, and it's also really great for cleaning stainless steel, food grade mineral oil. So if you have a stainless steel appliance and it's got fingerprints all over it, you just need to get some mineral oil. And
Do you clean the, as far as, I find it it's not a disinfectant, but it gets close, white vinegar on the wood?
white vinegar I use.
Yeah, just get all
I
the-
don't often use vinegar on wood, but I just use soap and water. I do use white vinegar as a cleaning product in the house. Like, I don't want to use bleach or whatever, so I just use vinegar or hydrogen
You
peroxide.
think the vinegar ruins the grain on the wood?
It's said to. I don't have direct experience with it. I've never seen it directly degrade the wood, but
Heard that the wood though won't grow bacteria the way plastic will.
really,
That's been proven. That's
Has it?
true, yeah.
Awesome.
The oils, I think, probably in the wood.
okay, that makes sense.
Or maybe it's just that it
I was just
doesn't have
remember
bad
hearing that-
bacteria, I think is what it is.
Well,
The bad
but
bacteria.
you shouldn't put your meat on wood because it's hard to get that meat off of the wood, I think.
Well, the best meat shops have ingrained maple blocks, so they cut on wood. So as long as you clean it, really well, then
Soap and water.
yeah, soap and water.
No input on that?
What's
I
that?
had a very short and traumatic experience working at David Elliott's Kosher Poultry House in Slaughterhouse in Moscow, Pennsylvania. And the one thing I got from that, besides a strong conviction never to eat another tortured animal, was they use nothing but salt.
Well, poultry is different. Poultry carries the highest bacterial load of any livestock animal. So even in the shop, I used to own a butcher shop. Even in the shop, we would get out a poly board and put it on top of the end-grade maple board when we cut poultry, because we just didn't want that bacteria in the wood.
Thing from that though was that this was the USDA inspected, there was an inspector right there, and the only thing, they had wooden tables and stuff, and they used salt.
I'm amazed that they had wooden tables at a USDA inspected facility.
Well, it was back in the 70s.
Yeah. Well, nowadays it's hard even at butcher shops to get the inspectors to approve wooden handles on knives. They just want everything to be poly, and they're okay with the tables a lot of times, but they want to see that you have poly boards. If you need to use them, you have them. And then the rosewood handles and stuff on the knives aren't allowed, which is really interesting, at least from my experience.
I've got a bamboo cutting board that works really well, and it
Yeah.
seems to be
I
very
got the
hard.
same thing. They're very.
Yeah, they work pretty well. They're lightweight. Sometimes they're not well crafted, so I found that bamboo boards will just deteriorate or split a lot easier. And I like a heavy board. I think it's better for my knives, and easier for me to work with. But bamboo is really popular and it's really affordable. It's sustainable, so that's perfectly good. Yeah. Seal it? Well, I just mean when they're made, like they're not often glued well. Yeah. I don't know. couldn't tell you. Was there a question over here?
You mentioned rosewood. Why not rosewood?
Oh, I was just saying that inspectors in commercial facilities are not letting some chefs and cooks use wooden handles of any kind. And I just threw out rosewood because it was a discussion in the butchery area. But there's a lot of different kinds of wood, wooden handles. So we'll talk, what time is it? Let's do a little time check. 7, we have 30 minutes. Okay, good. So we can keep working on, if anybody has a paring knife, you are welcome to peel turnips if you want, and then we can use the turnips for more julienne work, more chopping work, more dicing work if you want. But I want to move on to sharpening a little bit before we finish. So hopefully we'll have some time for questions, discussion, and practice at the end of the session. So we covered earlier the difference between honing and sharpening. Honing being bending those teeth back in alignment, and sharpening being taking metal off to create a new edge. And so there's a few ways you can do that. I use an oil stone, and this is a pretty cheap one. I don't remember the grit. I'd have to look on the box, which I'm happy to do for anybody who wants me to. But it's got two sides. It's got a coarse grit side and a fine grit side. So anytime you're sharpening a knife on a stone, you want to start coarser and move finer. And there are all kinds of grits from like 6,000 to 1,000, and you can do 3 different grits every time you sharpen. But these are, I think this is like a 4-in-1 or 6,000 and 1,000. And so that's a good combo to start with. And what I do is there's 2 types of stones. There's water stones and oil stones. Water stones can be more expensive and harder to maintain. And oil stones are a little easier to start out with. So I would get a towel and get it moist so that it doesn't slide around on the countertop. And then I will start with my coarse side. And you're welcome to come and touch this. Did you bring your stone down too? Okay, good. Is that an oil stone?
Yep.
Okay. So I put the coarse side down, and then I've got this honing oil. This is Lansky's brand. You can get this at Amazon. And so what I'll do is just drop a few drops of oil on the stone and rub it in. I've heard of people saying they got too much oil on their stone, but I've never had that problem. But I think you can use like Epsom salts or something to...
Club soda.
Club soda.
Soak it in club soda.
Put it in club soda, and it'll dry it up.
Long enough, you'll eventually get a residue that makes it not work.
Yeah, I think my fine side is starting to do that. I just got this about a year ago. So, what is it? It's called Lansky Sharpener's Honing Oil for bench stones and sharpening systems. Yeah, it's a type of mineral oil. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this boning knife because that's the one that needs to be sharpened. Or I could use a chef knife, maybe that other one, that wooden one. But what I'm going to do is basically find that angle that I was telling you about earlier, that 20-degree angle, and that's the most important part. And you may find it more comfortable to turn the stone this way and sharpen away from you or towards you. I'd like to do it this way. But I'm going to find that this being 90, this being about 45, and this being about 20. And I may find as I'm sharpening that I need to adjust that a little bit. You can kind of feel when you hit the right spot. And like I said, some knives may be angled a little bit more acutely than 20 degrees. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to spread my fingers as evenly across the blade as possible so that I can put generally even pressure across the blade as it is moving across the stone. And then in the direction of the edge, basically, which means back towards the spine, I'm just going to move that blade, the whole thing. You want to make sure you start at the top and you get the right sort of swooping action so that you can get the entire blade in one pass. And I'm going to do this like 10 or 12 times. Now I'll flip it. And it takes a little bit of getting used to. It'll be a little awkward at first, but you want to wipe it off, flip the stone over, oil the other side, and then move to so I'm moving to the finer grit at this point. And I just repeat the same wipe it off, hone it. And the way I test the sharpness is I take and I drag it across my fingernail. You can feel it really well. If it's dragging, you know it's sharp. If it slides really quickly, you know it's not sharp. And you can really tell how good of a job you've done keeping even pressure, because you'll find it's dragging down here, it'll slip really fast, and then it'll drag again. So you know you need to focus kind of more on that spot. Then you can go back in for more. If you're just like, if you're basically, I mean, I have like my thumbnail is just like from doing this all the time, you know. So if you care a lot about your nails, you may not want to use that technique, but that just gives me a really tactile way of figuring out how I'm doing. A lot of people get a piece of paper and try to cut it down, you know, vertically in the air or whatever. You can sort of just run your finger, like you're not cutting yourself, you're just sort of feeling that edge. But sometimes I don't find that that's trustworthy across the entire edge of the blade. That's why like the drag thing works for me. So I would do this again. And so if you haven't sharpened your knife in like years, you may easily have to do this 6, 8, 10 times, coarse, fine, hone, coarse, fine, hone, before you really feel like you've gotten it sharp. And some of those knives that you guys have borrowed, you can take a look after you use your knife, take a look at your blade like this. And you can see like little nicks, you know, little bends in it. And so that can be sometimes the very first thing you should do is hone it and then look at it again. And then, you know, if you feel like it needs a sharpen, then sharpen it. If you are having to force the knife through the food, you need to probably hone and sharpen. And if you're honing every time you use it, you'll really notice a difference. So if you guys want to practice sharpening, you're welcome to borrow the stone. You're welcome to borrow the oil. Pat also has a stone. I see another person has a stone. I don't know if you're willing to loan it out, but it's fine if you're not.
By the way, if you are trying to get a buildup of residue oil on your stone off, you don't just wipe club soda on, you soak it in it at least overnight.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
If you, like these stones, if you do it long enough, eventually you saturate the stone with oil, it gets a veneer, and you can't really get any sharpening from it. And years ago I asked the restaurant supply guy what to do about it, he said soak it in club soda. But you don't just put it on there for a little while, you just leave it in overnight. You know?
It may wear the teeth
Then you
down.
gotta kind of scrape it off, but it comes off.
You can get.
So this is a great question. She has a little bit of a serration on her paring knife, and she's like, should I use a stone for this? You will wear those little teeth down if you do it on a stone. There are electric sharpeners or pull-through sharpeners that reportedly work with serrated blades. And Pat, I think, brought one. Did you bring that little sharpener for the serrated blades?
No, I didn't.
Okay. I think he has a pull-through.
Oh, no, that one. I do have that one, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I meant the one I cheat with.
No. So there are some that I think are really bad, those push-through, pull-through things, or electric ones, because you can really wreck your blade. But there's one here that is sold with a particular harvest knife that we use. Do you get it from Johnny's, Pat?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, so Johnny's Seeds, johnnyseeds.com is their website. You can get one of these. And they're also making this cool little, talk about that other one that they're making that we're going to get.
That's a band. It's not little, but it's pretty big. It's a motor-driven band that you hone with. And it's like $89, and they have all these different jigs, so you can put everything from your spade to your chef's knife to a serrated
And we
knife.
want to try it out. And I want to try it on, like, I have like a meat slicer with a round blade, and I want to try it on that, you know, just to like get all my edges really sharp. But, if, you know, we'll let you know if it's total hack. Did you have a comment back here?
Ask about the crossed
It's
ceramic
actually Johnny's
rods.
selected seed.
Occasionally, you see those every now and then.
It's up in
Do,
Vermont.
do they have any place in the sharpening deal, or is it just much better to use the stone?
Ceramic rods are they have a place. I mean, people use them. I don't personally use them. I also don't use ceramic knives. They just break really easily. I mean, they all break really
I found that they
easily.
maintain the angle
Do
far
they?
better than I can do myself just by feel.
Interesting.
I don't have my harvest knife with me though.
How do you use this?
Basically, if you have a serrated knife.
Okay. Did everyone hear what the gentleman said? That he has better luck with a ceramic honing is a honing steel that you're using?
No, this is the ceramic sharpening rod.
Sharpening
They
rod.
sit at a specific angle, and they
Okay.
can maintain the 20 degree or 15
Yep.
or 14 degrees.
Pull the blade
And you're
through.
pulling
blade
it through.
through,
Yeah.
See, now,
Where did you get yours?
I
I think it's
change
old
that
Williams
angle.
College.
I've never seen how to do
I'll
that.
have to give it a try. I've never tried one of those before.
It hasn't been a bad thing. Wusthof also makes one.
Yeah, Wusthof probably, if it's making someone, it's a good thing. I mean, I really like Wusthof. It's a good company. Feel free, peel away.
Show me? I don't know how.
Okay.
I've always been afraid my mom always peels everything towards her thumb, and it scares me.
I sort of go towards my thumb, but I don't start so close to it. So I'd start out here and then just move my thumb back. So you see, I'm pushing. Here, I'll stand next to you. Put them? Yeah, we can get a big bowl and just throw everything in there. So I'm like pulling back towards me, and I'm using this thumb to control my, so my other thumb is pretty far away from me. And if my knife is sharp enough, it's not gonna slip and cut me, you know.
And is yours this finger on the blade or on?
It's
I
like
mean, on
this.
the handle or is
It's on the handle. I'm holding it like this. And then I'm using that thumb to just guide it.
On the ceramic thing,
If anybody wants to chop more, anybody? Chop or dice or mince more? Julianne? Here's a turnip.
When you have a very hard vegetable like a winter squash, like a butternut squash, do you use this to peel it?
If I've cut it into smaller pieces first. But that is one thing that I may well use my chef knife to take the peel off just because
And you
it's
just go
so difficult. Yeah.
okay.
Or I would cut it, like say this is the top of
Sometimes
it.
it works.
Sometimes it works. It depends on how cured it is. So the more cured and woody it is, like the harder it is to get the peel off. But you could like get it, you know, like the top part, you can get it really straight and you can just take your knife and go down, you know, that way you're like super
Yeah,
safe.
That's what I've been doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else want to peel? We have some turnips. You have a paring knife? You need one. Here you go. You feel good about it or do you want me to show you?
So you're holding it towards you?
Let me show you really fast. So I'm holding the knife like I've got, almost like I'm about to do a thumb grip, but I take my thumb off and I use it to guide me down the veggie. You know, and sometimes it's easier than other times, but that way I'm not like, I don't have my thumbs too close to it, you know? Yeah. Uh-huh. Does anybody else want a turnip? Yeah.
In case I missed that, but
Okay.
mine always find their way into the dishwasher,
Oh, yeah.
so not okay.
Well, it's not the most terrible thing in the world, but it'd be better if you hand washed them. And then make sure that they're really dry all the time. That's the biggest thing because they can get rust on them. And then they can warp more easily if they aren't dry and, you know, kept at a good room temperature.
I grew up only using these kind of knives.
Uh-huh.
Like, that's all that was ever in our house.
Yeah.
Or the Rada, or Rada, however you say it.
Uh-huh.
What, do you have an opinion about those?
I don't know them.
They're cheap. They're
Can I see it?
stainless steel.
Yeah.
They last forever.
Do they? They look like they're stamped.
It's R-A-D-A. Rada.
It's pretty nice.
I don't know it.
They do like fundraisers and so I got these
Okay.
today, but like the 4-H group gets these flyers and they can sell them and
Yeah.
raise them.
I think if it works for you, then use it, you know?
What is this kind of knife?
I mean, that's just a smaller chef's knife. So that's like a
This
4-inch,
feels
5
good in my
inch.
hand
Yeah.
versus those other ones feel so monstrous.
Yeah. If it works for you, go for it.
Can I rinse off my knife?
Yeah, absolutely,
before I,
yeah. This is
sharpen it?
actually not a very good food sink. So I would say over here. And so this has to be on as well as these in order for the water to work. So we also have a compost bucket. If you have onion skins or turnip skins, yeah, let's pass it around. And I'm gonna get a bowl to pass around for all of the vegetables.
Then just do the
well,
same
not the vegetables themselves you
You
can
could
chop. We're
actually
going to
use your
use.
other
So
hand
just
and
put
do
your
it.
waste in the compost bucket.
Switch.
Ooh, nice chicken
And so
right there. That's good.
find the business side, which is this side here, and then it's a I'm not gonna sharpen this one because it's brand new. And these things are dangerously sharp.
Oh, okay.
But you just basically go through so it fits in there.
The teeth,
And it's a turning motion as you do it.
Oh, cool.
And you can bring these back to never quite as sharp as factory sharp.
How many
still-
times in each serration do you think you have to hit it, though?
Not that many times.
Two or
This is diamond. It does it pretty fast. you
Yeah,
know.
okay.
Probably I do it about 5 times probably, and I get it, So it's just kind of
Yeah, I'd like to try.
a turn of motion through it,
Yeah.
And these knives are, if you're a farmer, this is the tool, but you have to know how to use them because if you don't, you'll cut yourself all day long.
That's what you were cutting.
Actually, no, I did use a grass cutting knife I had. I wouldn't recommend it for grass cutting because,
But you get those, those thumbs
He's
roll way up,
gonna
but it's,
cut it kind of rough.
well,
like it
actually, no,
shows
it's
up those
incredibly well. Not really that rough,
you're
but
pushing forward and you're pulling.
it's easy, especially for a beginning graph person like me, to cut yourself.
Yeah.
If you cut yourself with this, it's a way worse wound. So I'd actually, if I was really seriously crafting, I'd buy a graphic knife.
Yeah.
And just keep it
I'm gonna
really
come
sharp.
next week to the tomato one.
That we
That's kind
actually
of
use,
intriguing.
we actually use a tool we buy from Johnny's, which
I don't know
has
if you're ankling
a
it right.
disposable, very sharp razor.
20 degrees is flat.
It's on a tool that cuts it very
You're
Rather than I
about,
do.
put it on a cut. The first time I tried, I used these knives. And
this is, too big a cut. That's 0, that's 45,
Yeah, I
20
think,
is
I think
about,
it's that
well,
one last
that's a
spring
little
that's.
steep, but that's,
Yeah, but see, that last spring was from that one.
and it'll go to
Changing it as
where,
like-
No, actually, it was,
You'll
in the
feel
greenhouse,
it.
we're just doing propagating. Remember that?
Oh, okay, the propagation is totally different.
Yeah.
When you're grafting, they have to
Yeah,
match
they have
perfect.
to match, right?
Propagation is
Does
totally
anybody need a bowl for your veggies?
Yeah, that's what I
just follow
remember,
the
was the
curve.
red.
When I was practicing in Bob Anderson's grafting fruit trees,
She said like 8 times.
yeah. Depending on those.
I'm pretty sure it's pretty dumb. I've had
recommend
this for a few years.
grafting
I've never
with
sharpened it.
force and grafting with a few minutes, and it slips. Just cut yourself with any knife. This one here.
You don't need this, do
Now
you?
switch hands.
Oh, yeah, no, these things really,
I know, that's great.
Do the same thing that way.
you actually can get
I'm not
in trouble.
ambidextrous.
Well, you don't have to be, you have to
In a
just
lot
sort
of
of learn
schools,
to.
cutting
And then, hey Taylor, can you pass me that compost?
Yeah, just think about it.
have you
Just go.
concealed weapon.
So now you can go home and practice. You go get lightning fast, impress your friends. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reaching right over you. How's it going with the sharpening?
It's weird.
It is weird. It feels weird.
Switch hands.
Uh-huh.
I have to. I can't just leave it. I guess I want.
Yeah.
This way makes sense, but this
Yep.
way doesn't make sense in my brain.
It definitely takes a little bit of like muscle memory work.
How do you do it so it's not hidden?
You're good. That's a good angle right there.
That's it.
Yep.
And then it push.
Yep.
What if you pull instead of push?
Well, you kind of want it to go away from the edge. So if you're pushing,
It's going
then the stone is going, you know what I mean? It's dragging
just seems
backwards. It is easier to do that way, but it's not really getting the best edge on it, you know?
Okay, it's not as sharp.
Right.
Thank you, Meredith.
Yeah, thanks for coming.